All right, so if you're a starseed, you might have noticed that in the last 2 to 3 years, all right, so 2021, 22, 23, and probably onwards from there, I would say, the energies have been very strange. There's no doubt about that, right? We've been noticing things have been feeling different. There's been time dilation where it feels like time's speeding up or slowing down. And connections, friendships, relationships have been stirred up, to say the least. A lot of friendships have been broken because of the discord in vibrational states. So yeah, I thought I'd make a quick video explaining kind of what's going on, because it can feel confusing. It can feel like you don't know what's going on. But ultimately, it's very simple what's going on. And that is, we're entering, there's a few different perspectives on this, right? So you have the solar cycles, so solar minimums and maximums, which have a huge impact on global consciousness. And so we're in kind of like a very interesting time in that cycle. Economically, we're due a downturn. So that's why things have been shaken up. It's been a bit crazy. And astrologically, Pluto has just kind of had its conjunction with America again in the last few days. Well, it depends when you watch this, but yeah, it's just happened. The last time that happened, Rome fell, and it was essentially 1 or 2 years of very intense energies and destruction, but also rebirth and regrowth, where things, old systems collapsed and new ones were built. And then also, on top of those things, you have the concept or the theory that we're, as a galaxy, we are now entering a section, if you like, of the galaxy where there is higher light. And I'm not talking about sunlight, I'm talking about like a higher light energy, photon energy from galactic suns. And very interesting things are happening with that. David Wilcock talks a lot about this in terms of like entering a new age of consciousness. And it's been mentioned a few times as well in various other places. So what does this mean for starseeds? So ultimately what it means is that our vibration or our frequency is amplified. So people who are already high vibration are becoming even higher, and people who are low are kind of descending lower. They're becoming more fearful, more easily manipulated. And then the people who are kind of in the middle are being drawn to one end of the polarized spectrum. So they're either waking up, or they're falling into the fear and manipulation and negativity. And what this means, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on which way you look at it, is that people of all walks of life are becoming polarized. They're magnetizing to one end of the spectrum. On one side you have fear, negativity, manipulation, anger, right? And then on the other side you have light, positivity, joy, happiness, and fearlessness, essentially, and freedom, which is a very important part of this. So because of these things, because of the economic cycles and historical cycles, we're due this shaking up of the economy, right? The collapse of economic systems, geopolitical systems, governments, structures, and the trust in these organizations is at an all-time low. And then on top of that, you have the manipulation has been ramping up. So the powers in control, right? The elites and the... if you know what I mean, then I don't need to explain it. If you don't know what I mean, I can't really say it here because of censorship, but I would advise you to look into like which kind of bloodlines and families and elite groups of people really control the banking organizations of this world. Anyway, so these people are ramping up the manipulation and the fear because they're desperate. They know that their time is almost up, so they're kind of trying to get everything in just before the awakening, essentially, before the mass of the global population wakes up and realizes that we're divine immortal beings, and that we ultimately have been giving away our power to a tiny, tiny group of people for thousands of years, when ultimately we don't have to do that. It's a choice. But really what's happening, I think, at least, is that we're starting to remember, more and more people are starting to remember that these bodies and minds is not all we are. We're much more than that. We're immortal beings having a very temporary human experience. When you realize that, you can no longer be manipulated by the fear of death or the fear of control or, corruption and negativity. Because in order to fear those things, you first have to truly believe that this life is all there is. If you believe that you only have 80 years, then suddenly the concept of dying is terrifying, because that's all you have is this 80 years. But if you believe that this is just a very temporary experience and that we're actually immortal in terms of our consciousness, then you can't be scared by that. So there's no way to manipulate you. There's no way to scare you into compliance, because you're not scared of that stuff. And it has no control over you. So this is what we're seeing, and especially starseeds, right? Because as a starseed, ultimately what it means is you remember more than the average person. You remember fundamentally that you're not from here, and that this is not the origin of your soul. You have come here essentially temporarily to do or experience something. So yeah, I made a video about this. I'm actually Andromedan/Arcturian myself, and you do feel it. You know, you sense these things. And especially after you've been looking into this for a while, you can very easily see right through the manipulation and the narratives and the agendas that people have. So yeah, I think it will probably get more intense in this year and the next year. Just looking at historical cycles, astrological cycles, the way the world is going, and kind of what we've collectively manifested. It probably will get, I don't want to say worse, because that's implying that it's objectively bad. I think it's also a catalyst for people waking up, because you've got to remember that 3 years ago, the world was in a vastly different place. Yeah, you could say things were better. There were no restrictions, there was no obvious, it was obvious to a lot of people, but there was no globally obvious scandals or corruption or agendas. But at the same time, now that there has been that for 2 years, and now that there is all this information coming out showing how these authorities and organizations have essentially lied directly to the public for countless months and 2 years. Now the trust in these organizations is at an all-time low. And what happens is when people don't trust the organizations, they start to look at alternatives. They start to think, what is the truth then? What is the reality then? And that's when they start to ask questions and do self-inquiry and look at, what's really going on. And that causes an awakening. And that's really powerful, because usually this wouldn't happen on this scale. You would have obviously the elite control structures, you would have the matrix, as you would call it. But most people will be completely unaware of that. But now, a huge number of people are becoming aware of that. And that's what we're seeing, is this huge awakening on a grand scale. So yeah, I think it will get more intense, but try not to see it as a bad thing. The more Orwellian and draconian and tyrannical the elites try and impose their system on us, the more people that will cause to essentially question it and stand up and say, no, I don't want that. That's why am I giving my power to you? These unelected, private, global elite leaders who nobody asked for, nobody voted for them, and yet somehow they've decided that they run the world and that we have to do what they say, essentially, which is absolutely not the case. If you I saw an interesting video yesterday actually about this. If you were to visualize how many of us there are versus how many people are in control of the systems that we run, it's just astronomical. It's literally like, imagine like a huge playing field full of marbles, and that represents the people. And then if you just imagine now one marble on that playing field represents the people who have control over us. In terms of the technocrats, the leaders, the people at the World Economic Forum, the different groups that have wormed their way into positions of power are an absolutely tiny minority. And ultimately, they only have power because nobody knows about this. They only have power because people don't understand the geopolitical chess moves they're making and the goals that they have. Once you understand their goals, the whole thing is easy to see through. You can't be brainwashed by the TV, because you understand that essentially one or two people, not companies, people, have control over 90% of the global media. 90% of the TV channels, the radios, the interviews that you think are trying to present news to you in an unbiased way are under the control of 2 or 3 people. And those 2 or 3 people are under the control of an even smaller group of people. Anyway, let me know what you think, and watch the video I mentioned, it's in the description, and leave a comment, let me know.